All right, you guys can grab your PowerPoint today, and we'll be in 15.4, the last section that we are actually going to study in this unit, last lecture of the year. So, anyways, you guys can turn in your books to 550. That's where we are. Excuse me. So that's where we'll hang out today. All right. All right, so, whoops, backwards there. All right, fertilization, pregnancy, and then birth. So those are the main subjects we're going to look at. Fertilization of the oocyte. Remember that an oocyte is an egg cell. Okay, so that's the female gamete. So a few things we want to know. I want to put these notes somewhere else because you'll have some other notes to fill in on that thing. All right, first of all, a zygote, this is the first cell of the new individual. So when you see that word zygote, Z-Y-G-O-T-E, that is the first cell of the new individual. So sperm cell meets up with the egg cell, they combine chromosomes, you have a zygote. That is cell number 1. Okay. Something else to note, it said an ovulated oocyte. So that means an oocyte that has been, ovulation has occurred, an oocyte has left the ovary, right, can live for about 24 hours. A sperm cell can live for up to 5 days in the female reproductive tract. So what this means, and this is important for you guys to know, is that, so let's say we'll take May, for example. So let's say May 18th is the day of ovulation for a female. That means, okay, so sperm can live up to 5 days in a female reproductive tract. That means if ovulation occurs on day 18 of May, sexual intercourse could have occurred anywhere between the 13th and actually the 19th, technically. Any of those dates for pregnancy to occur. So I know sometimes you think, okay, well, pregnancy can't happen that easily, right? There's only 1 day a month. But there's really more days a month because sperm can stay alive for so long. So if they can live for up to 5 days, then that 1 day of fertilization, okay, you could have sexual intercourse for 5 days before that day of fertilization, plus a day after, because the oocyte can live for 24 hours, right? So we have 6 days, technically, each month where pregnancy is a possibility. Now that's maximum, that's not going to be like that every time, but that is a possibility. And so pregnancy is not as difficult to occur, as you might think it can be, especially if there's issues or if there's ovulation problems. And sometimes it's not even that, it's just there could be any number of things. But I just wanted you guys to be aware of how that works, and it's not just a 1 day thing, but that there's 6 potential days for fertility. But ovulation, the oocyte doesn't last as long as the sperm. Okay. All right, so journey of the sperm, the fertilization part. So you can turn it over to 552. That helps also. So it says the journey of the sperm. So the sperm travels through the vagina, the uterus. Okay, so it has to go through the vagina, and then it goes through the cervical opening, cervical os, and the opening at the bottom of the uterus, which is the cervix. Travel up through the uterus into the fallopian tube. And it actually, the ovulated oocyte is hanging out at like the end third of the fallopian tube. So that's where fertilization actually occurs, is in the tubes. Okay. says capacitation says can take up to 10 hours. Capacitation is a process in which the sperm is able to penetrate the oocyte and fertilize it. So that can take a while because the sperm actually has to, the egg itself has like a really tough covering around it. And so the sperm has to break through, and millions of sperm actually can reach that area. The acrosome of the sperm contains enzymes. If you'll remember, we just talked about that earlier this week. The acrosome is that covering, kind of like a helmet, if you will, on the head of the sperm. And so the acrosome contains enzymes that penetrate that covering of the egg, the zona pellucida, and that glycoprotein layer. The zona pellucida is the glycoprotein layer around the egg. It's kind of a protective layer. Something interesting to note, egg is the largest cell in the body, sperm is the smallest. So kind of interesting to note. Acrosomal enzymes, these are released whenever the sperm comes into contact with the zona pellucida, that glycoprotein layer. And so it says when sperm binds with specific receptors on the surface of the oocyte, then it merges, okay, with the oocyte. As soon as that occurs, that fertilization occurs, and the sperm merges with the egg, then this new like protective coating, kind of an armor shield type of coating, occurs around that zygote. And that way no more sperm can get in. And that prevents what's called polyspermy, which is where more than one sperm fertilize an egg. And that would cause, that would make there be way too many chromosomes, so it wouldn't survive that. That would not be a viable zygote if more than one sperm were to penetrate. All right, fertilization of the oocyte. So again, protection against that polyspermy. Only one sperm is required for fertilization. More than one sperm causes the death of the oocyte. And then the chemistry of the zona pellucida changes, like I just said. One thing to note, it's one sperm and one egg. So think about twins, though, or multiples. Fraternal twins, or fraternal multiples, okay, that comes from there actually being two or more eggs that were both fertilized. Okay, so two eggs released at the same time. Now, identical twins is a little bit different. Identical twins means that you started with one zygote, but it separated into two and then created two babies. Okay, so the zygote separated into two, created two. That's why they would have the same, their DNA would look similar because they started with that one zygote. Versus fraternal twins, which really are more like siblings, like your normal siblings, just happened at the same time. Completion of meiosis and then fertilization. The sperm entry causes that to be finished. All right, so pregnancy, page 552. All right, pregnancy or gestation, you'll hear it termed, lasts approximately 265 days. That is from the date of implantation. I'm sorry, that's from the date of fertilization. Okay, technically, whenever we consider pregnancy as a whole, we would say it lasts 280 days. And that's because when we normally start counting down pregnancies, it actually starts with the last menstrual period. Okay, it actually starts with the last menstrual period. So that actually adds 2 weeks on to the beginning of that fertilization process. So when somebody says they're 5 weeks pregnant, what that really means is they're actually 3 weeks post-fertilization. So 5 weeks pregnant would mean that 3 weeks ago is when fertilization happened. We just time it by that last menstrual period because that's usually the best, women don't necessarily know when they ovulate unless they've really been studying their body or maybe they've really been watching so that they could get pregnant. most women don't know when they ovulate. And so that's one thing that most women would know is their last menstrual period. And so they count from there. So 5 weeks pregnant, again, is actually just 3 weeks since fertilization, which is crazy because at 5 weeks, an embryo actually has a functional cardiovascular system. You can see a heartbeat beating on an ultrasound at 5 weeks, which is actually only 3 weeks, again, since fertilization occurred. So I hope that makes sense for you. Just think about the uterine cycle, starts on day 1, first day of your last menstrual period. 14 days from there is technically where ovulation should occur, somewhere in that range, around day 14. And that depends on cycle too. But let's say you have a 6-week cycle. Okay, let's say instead of a normal 28-day cycle, you have a 42-day or a 36-day cycle or whatever, 6-week cycle, we'll say. So if that is the case, then you actually ovulate 2 weeks before the start of your menstrual cycle. So, and I may have talked about this on the other video, I can't remember, but so there's really not a good way. It's not like every time 14 days after your first menstrual period means that you're automatically ovulating and you're safe all the other time. It doesn't work like that because it's really timed by how 14 days before the next menstrual cycle, if that makes sense. So if you have a 6-week cycle, then, ovulation would potentially occur somewhere around day 22 instead of day 14. All right? No. 30, if you have a 6-week cycle, it's 42 days. So, yeah, it would actually happen around day 38, right, instead of whatever. So, I'm still getting that off. Day 28. There we go. Sorry, it's been a long day. So, anyways, my point is it's really hard to know exactly when you're going to ovulate. And there's just no surefire way to know. And so it's important to know that pregnancy, and then you have that wide period like I was talking about earlier, because sperm can live for 5 days in the female reproductive tract. So that's a lot of days that fertilization could occur at the same time that sexual intercourse occurred while that sperm is still alive. So pregnancy lasts from fertilization to, we're going to look at different things. We're going to look at fertilization to implantation, and then we'll look at the development of the placenta, embryo, and fetus. We're going to look at all these things. All right, so fertilization to implantation. So this is just the first week, basically, of what happens in pregnancy. Cell stages starts as a zygote again. That's your 46 chromosomes. That's the cell of the new individual. Okay, so you've got 46 chromosomes, the whole DNA code in that one cell to create an entire person. So everything that's needed to build all the proteins is found in the DNA of that one cell, which is just crazy. Isn't that so amazing that one cell contains the whole blueprint for everything that your body's going to do, how it's going to be made, what you're going to look like, how your heart's going to function, how your brain's going to think, how your skin's going to grow. And all of that is found in that one cell, which is just amazing. All right, so the zygote is that first cell of the person. Then it splits, right? So that cell, starts splitting and it splits again. So morula is the embryo says reaches the 4-cell stage. They're in part C, and then the morula is at 3. I feel like I'm saying that. I don't know. What do you say? I feel like I'm saying that weird, but just follow along. The embryo at this point becomes a morula, a solid ball of cells. Well, it's still an embryo, but so that is just like a ball of cells. This is day 3 after fertilization has happened. So it still hasn't implanted in the uterus yet. it's still traveling along female, the fallopian tubes at this point, okay? So from 4 to 7 days, you have what's called a blastocyst. Remember, blasto is like it's building, like we talked about, osteoblasts, right? They're building cells. So an early blastocyst and implanting blastocyst. So 4 to 7 in there. It continues to grow. You get this cavity kind of space in it, and it actually implants into the wall of the uterus. Now, remember when we talked about the uterine cycle and how, ovulation occurs, and you've got, up to that point, you've got the walls of the inside of the uterus, the endometrium, build up. And they just keep building up and building up. Lots of blood vessels, lots of extra tissue, tons of blood vessels, lots of extra tissue, until it's time for when implantation would potentially occur. And so implantation occurs about a week after fertilization. It says around day 7, which is day 15 of the uterine cycle, and the endometrium is thick with blood vessels. So the endometrium is thickened up, it's ready for implantation. And the blastocyst then binds to the endometrium. It says implantation is complete at around 12 days after fertilization. So 12 days, a week and a half after fertilization, it is implanted. Implantation is complete into the endometrium of the uterus. All right. After implantation, then these trophoblast cells, right, that are part of that blastocyst, you can see them written on the paper on 552 there, produce what's called human chorionic gonadotropin, HCG. And this hormone, it's a hormone, and it comes from the trophoblast. It comes from the trophoblast that's around this new individual, right here. So the hormone comes from there, and that HCG is really the pregnancy hormone. That's what, if a lady has HCG in her system, normally she wouldn't have that at all because it comes from this. And so that's what pregnancy tests check for, is that HCG hormone. But what that HCG does is it actually makes the corpus luteum stay active. Remember, the corpus luteum is like that kind of imploded follicle from ovulation that secretes progesterone. So the HCG makes the corpus luteum stay active. It doesn't just go away. It stays active so it can produce progesterone and estrogen. That way the endometrium will stay and keep all those blood vessels and tissues. It doesn't slough off and cause somebody to have their period. That's why that missed period occurs, because normally your body, gets ready for implantation, and then when it doesn't happen, you don't have this HCG, then the corpus luteum dies off, it quits producing progesterone, and all of the inside wall of the uterus, the endometrium, sloughs off and causes a woman to have her period. Well, when you have HCG in your system that's being produced by this blastocyst that has implanted, it's telling your body, no, we need to keep going. We need to keep up the walls of the uterus. We need to be really thick and need to have that good blood flow. I'm sorry, I should have gone to this picture while I was talking the whole time. And anyway, so I apologize, I should have been using this one. So there's the zygote, the spore cell stage, you got the morula here. Again, this takes about 12 days after implantation. Hold on a second. "12 days after fertilization, you have this implantation occurs." Okay, and that's where it stays. All right, development of the placenta, embryo, and the fetus. So again, the cardiovascular system is functional at 3.5 weeks after fertilization, which is about 5.5 weeks pregnancy is what you would normally consider. You're 5 weeks pregnant, baby, there's already a heartbeat. You can already see the heart beating on the ultrasound. And that's only 3 weeks after fertilization. So that's about, I would say that's about 1 week after a missed period. You can already see, right? Is that right? Yeah, it's about a week, 1 to 2 weeks after a missed period. You can already see the heartbeat going. So the embryo is what we consider is what you call the individual after implantation all the way up to 8 weeks. It's called an embryo. So major growth and development occur during those first 8 weeks. And that's why it's really important for you ladies, someday when you're planning on having kids, or if you're in a place where you're in the potential to get pregnant, it's so important to go ahead and take prenatal vitamins, because you don't always know. Most women don't even know that they're pregnant until they've already been pregnant for 6 or 8 weeks, or they're already 6 or 8 weeks along. And by then, the basis of the brain has already been formed, and the spinal cord has already been formed. The basis of the cardiovascular system has already been formed. And if you don't even know and you're not taking care of yourself, or exposing the embryo to other things that are not good, you may not even realize it. So that's one thing that's very important. The placenta develops during that time, and this isn't actually its own organ, and it supplies nutrients to the embryo and the fetus. Now, one really cool thing about the placenta is that the baby's blood vessels actually come out of the umbilical cord. And so you've got baby's blood vessels that make up kind of the inside of the placenta. It kind of is like a pancake or something, and it attaches to the wall of the inside of the uterus. And so anyway, so you got the baby's blood vessels, okay, that come out of the umbilical cord, and you got lots and lots of the baby's capillaries, and then the mother's blood is also in the placenta, but they don't all mix. The blood doesn't mix. They're just so the mother's blood and the baby's blood, there's actually just nutrients and oxygen and carbon dioxide that's diffused across those 2 capillary beds. So the mother's blood and the baby's blood don't cross, but those nutrients do diffuse across their walls, which is so cool. It's crazy to think about. It can mix, but alcohol and drugs definitely diffuse across that membrane. So that's another reason to just be careful. Fetal alcohol syndrome can occur. And, babies, drugs, those move across that placenta. And so if the mother is addicted to drugs, the baby will also be addicted to drugs. They're used to having that in their system. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen a baby that is truly, or seen a picture, maybe seen it on TV or something, but babies that are born addicted to drugs do not bode well. They really, really struggle to live. And a lot of times have lasting effects. It's not just something that, once they detox the baby's okay. Like, there's a more, I'm not going to say more often, but there are often long-term birth defects that are related to a baby whose mother was addicted to drugs, which caused the baby to be also. A fetus is what we call the baby after 8 weeks of development. So after 8 weeks of development, it's called a fetus. At that point, you can see in here, so a few other things that have grown around this baby. You've got the chorion, which is kind of the outer layer of, I'm sorry, yeah, you got the amnion, which is like the sac that surrounds the baby, and the chorion sits right on the outside of that. Inside the amniotic sac, you have amniotic fluid. That's what the baby stays in. Actually, the baby breathes that in, so it goes into their lungs. And they swallow some of it. So that's just the norm. Amniotic fluid is what is inside of it. It also contains DNA, and they can do an amniocentesis, which is where they puncture the belly and remove some of the fluid out of there. They can test for lots of different things that way. It's not a common test, and it's not one that you want to have done if you don't need it, because there's lots of risks involved. So, all right. Then here's the cervix. This is, I'm guessing what this is. There's usually a mucus plug. Kind of plugs up the lower end or the upper end of the cervix. That usually comes out, a week or two before birth. Oh, I added in a few of these pictures from my old PowerPoint. I kind of forgot I did that. So here's a picture of a 7-week embryo, which means what? 5 weeks after fertilization. So already brain has, like, the basis of the brain and spinal cord is already formed. Cardiovascular system's already working. You could hear a heartbeat at this point. So yolk sac goes away. This is just part of what was that initial bit of cells, but it goes away. And umbilical vein here, kind of where they open this up. You can see the amniotic sac around this one. There, look, fingers and toes, eyes, you can already see it. Okay, you guys are going to want to add some of these onto your PowerPoint, because I did not print all of this part. I just need to make you guys your own. I'll just make sure and print this one for you guys, so you got the right one. I printed myself the wrong one. All right, functions of the placenta. So, forms a barrier between the mother and the embryo. Again, blood is not exchanged, delivers nutrients and oxygen, removes waste from embryonic blood, becomes an endocrine organ because it produces hormones. And what it does is it takes over for the corpus luteum, and so it starts to produce estrogen and progesterone. And those two hormones together, along with some others, kind of help to maintain the pregnancy. Those hormones have to stay stable and be where they're supposed to be in order for the pregnancy to continue. Again, the fetus, this is beginning the 9th week. All organ systems are formed by the end of the 8th week. All the bases of the organ systems are formed at that point. Activities of the fetus, basically growth, and then organ specialization and development continues to occur. Lots of growth, change in appearance. I mean, just, it's crazy. So photos of a developing fetus, fingers and toes already. This is all from the old textbook too. It's got so much good information in it. All right, so development of the human fetus at 8 weeks, so end of the embryonic period. Look at this. Head is almost as large as the rest of the body. All major brain regions are present. So we've already got parietal in your temporal, occipital, etc. Midbrain, your pons, everything's already there. Liver is extra large because it's starting to form blood cells so they can carry oxygen, right? Limbs are present. Initially they're webbed, but by the end of that week, right, they are already separated and got good fingers and toes. Bone formation's already begun, heart started pumping, and the body systems are present. About 1 gram, about 1 inch long at this point. 9 to 12 weeks, so this is the end of the third trimester. Pregnancy is broken up into 3 sections. You have the first trimester, second trimester, and third. First trimester is about the first 12 weeks or so. And so second trimester usually goes somewhere to around week 28. I guess it's 14 weeks actually, somewhere in there, 13, 14. And then the last trimester goes on from there. So 9 to 12 weeks, look at this. Head still dominant, but body is elongating and brain continues to enlarge. Facial features present. Walls of the hollow visceral organs are getting smooth muscle, so intestines, stomach, etc. Blood cell formation starts in the bone marrow. 12 weeks, you can already detect gender at 12 weeks. My cousin, she had her gender, they had an early, maybe they did the DNA testing, I can't remember, but at 12 weeks, she already knew what she was having. Approximate crown to rump length is about 9 centimeters. So you're looking at about 3 or 4 inches long. 13 to 16 weeks. Sensory organs are present. Eyes and ears kind of assume their position and their shape. Their face starts to look more human. Body's growing. Kidneys get their structure. 16 weeks. Bones are, and you can see, I mean, sonograms, you can see their bones and you can see how they're shaped. Somewhere around week 18, they usually do 18 to 20, they do like an anatomical ultrasound, and that's where they really look for any abnormalities. They look at the spine to see if there's any evidence of spina bifida, and they look at the brain to see if there's any abnormalities there. They look at the heart to see if it's pumping the way that it's supposed to. Vernix covers the body at 7 to 20 weeks, and then they have lanugo, which is this like silky hair. You know, if babies are born premature, a lot of times they'll be really hairy, and that's why. They lose some of that later in the pregnancy, but they have this very silky, very, very soft. But the vernix is this like sebaceous secretions, really oily, keeps their skin oily and soft. Starting to get restricted on their space, so they kind of get in the fetal position. Everything gets kind of proportioned out. Quickening occurs, which is where the mother starts to feel movement. Approximate length, 19 centimeters, which is, what, 6 or 7 inches long. 21 to 30 weeks. Lots of weight increase, specific, and the mom too. Usually at this point you can really start to see the pregnancy. Sometimes you never see it. It just depends on the woman's body. Says so babies can technically, they say at 24 weeks can be born and have a chance of survival at 24 weeks. Now remember, and I'm not going to tell you guys one way or the other, but remember that in Texas, abortion is legal up to 20 weeks. So we just read that 20 weeks. Final proportions occurred. Mother can already feel movement, 6, 7 inches long. And of course, gender is already there. All the organs are functioning in a, they still have lots of development to be done, but they are functional at that point. But at 24 weeks, a baby can be born and make it. I mean, they can make it. It's really hard to regulate their body temperature, and the lungs have not matured enough yet usually. So they usually will give, if they know the mom's trying to go into labor too early, they'll give her a shot to help the lungs mature. But that doesn't always happen. Myelination of the spinal cord begins. The eyes are open. Skin is really wrinkled and red. Fingernails and toenails, they've already got those. Well proportioned. Blood cell formation. Testes enter the scrotum in the 7th month in males. And then at birth, here we are. Crown to rump length should be somewhere around at the end of that interval, that 30 weeks, I guess it's saying. 28 centimeters. It's like, that's not long enough for normal, but So at birth, skin is whitish pink, fat laid down, so you'll see some fat. They're still pretty thin usually. It just depends on the baby. And then crown to rump length at this point, 14 to 16 inches, or it could be bigger. Most babies I would think are more like 18-ish, 19. All right, effects of pregnancy on the mother. So from conception until birth. Anatomical changes, of course, the uterus enlarges. Obviously, it has to if the baby's going to grow. Lordosis occurs, which is that over kind of curvature of the lower back. And that's just part of the uterus just being so heavy and so big that it protrudes forward and kind of pulls the back that way. And then relaxation of the pelvic ligaments and the pubic symphysis because of relaxin. So relaxin is a hormone that actually makes the joints just kind of relax and spread out a little bit. And the purpose in that is to get the mom ready for childbirth so that her hips can spread out some, but it also occurs in other joints. A lot of times women will complain about like their foot grew in size while they're pregnant. Well, that's part of it, is that hormones effects on the joints. Other physiological changes, you have the GI system. Morning sickness is common. It's related to all those extra hormones, especially at the beginning of the pregnancy. Especially there at the beginning of the pregnancy. Heartburn is common because obviously the baby is taking up space in the stomach, which is putting pressure on the stomach, which is trying to push food back up the esophagus, causing heartburn. And then constipation is caused because the motility in the intestines and the digestive tract is just not there because it's overcrowded again. Urinary system, kidneys have extra burden, so producing more urine because there's more blood flow. And there's more waste because there's waste coming from the baby as well. Also, the uterus compresses the bladder that causes stress incontinence. So sneezing, coughing, whatever, those kind of things can cause incontinence because the bladder's already being pushed on by the uterus. The respiratory system, nasal mucosa becomes congested and swollen. A lot of pregnant ladies develop that congestion, and that's just part of it because there's all that extra blood flow. Vital capacity and respiratory rate increase because there's not as much room for your lungs to breathe, so your respiratory rate increases to make up for that. Plus, you have more blood, which needs more oxygen, so increased respiratory rate. Dyspnea often occurs during the later stages because you don't have space. Cardiovascular system, blood volume increases by 25 to 40%. Nothing's even higher than that. I was thinking it was like double is what my doctor said, but I could be totally off on that. Blood pressure increases, pulse increases, trying to get everything moved around. Varicose veins are common. All right, childbirth. Back to our textbook we got right now. Okay, parturition. So this is a birth itself. I want us to flip over to 556 in your textbook. Let's talk about, 555. I'm going to read under childbirth. It says childbirth is also called parturition. Normally occurs 38 to 42 weeks after the first day of the last menstrual period. Toward the end of gestation, high levels of estrogen and progesterone cause the uterine muscle cells to become more sensitive to oxytocin. We talked about oxytocin in the endocrine chapter, a hormone that plays a key role in labor. Oxytocin is released by the pituitary glands of both the fetus and the mother. Okay, so pituitary glands of the fetus and the mother both release oxytocin. Fetal oxytocin causes the placenta to release what's called prostaglandins, which are lipid compounds that trigger uterine muscle contractions. Once the uterine muscle has started to contract, the baby's head is pushed into the cervical opening, causing mechanical receptors to be stretched there. These receptors send messages to the brain that stimulate maternal oxytocin release. So the baby's pituitary gland produces oxytocin, okay, which is a hormone, and it has its effect on the uterus. So the uterus starts contracting, which the contractions is just where the uterus, which is this giant muscle, contracts, and it's just pushing the baby down into the cervix. So when that cervix is stretched, then those stretch receptors send messages back to the brain that say, hey, we need more oxytocin. Remember at the very beginning of the year, we talked about positive feedback mechanisms, and this is an example of that. Oxytocin, right, is released, says, hey, we need more stretching, we need more pushing, we need more contractions. These receptors, already read that, even more vigorous contractions of the uterine muscle and even greater stretching of the cervical receptors. So again, positive feedback, because it's just getting stronger, and they just continually get stronger until the baby's not in the birth canal anymore. Oxytocin, you've probably heard the word Pitocin before if you've been around anyone else giving birth. So Pitocin is the medication that they give moms to induce them. Or sometimes they'll give it after birth too. And one thing that does is that causes those contractions of the uterus artificially, right? So if your brain's not making those occur, then the Pitocin hopefully will and has that effect. Excuse me. So that's what Pitocin is. The other thing oxytocin does is after labor, so after the baby comes out, it actually causes the uterus to continually contract until the placenta comes out, and then it even continues to contract in order to get smaller. Whenever it shrinks down, it contracts. So that's oxytocin. Stages of labor. These are very basic. There's actually a lot more to this, but stages of labor, basic stages are dilation, expulsion, and then delivery of the placenta. So dilation, this is when kind of you typically think of people going into labor, and this is what you think of as labor, really. That's just the contraction and the dilation all the way up to 10 centimeters. So when you're listening and people say, oh, she's dilated to a 7 or she's dilated to a 4, what that means is that the doctor actually, and they just use it's all subjective, so it kind of depends on the doctor, but hopefully they have an idea. Okay, but what happens is as the baby is pushing through the cervix, look over on 556 real quick. No, this picture's not on here, I don't think, no. All right, so what I want you to look at is part A there. You can see where the cervical opening is, kind of the baby's head's pushing on it. And see how it's thinned out and it's open. So normally the cervix is, go back to this picture. Oops. If you go back to, here it is. This one. All right, if you go back to this one, see how the cervix down here is still really thick? Okay. Well, as labor progresses, okay, so what happens is this, whoops. So this wall, baby gets bigger, pushes up against the bottom of the uterus because these contractions are happening up here, and hopefully the baby's head is down. What happens is this all thins out. So this, instead of being thick, it all pushes out and it gets very thin. And that's what they say, they're talking about like the thinning of the cervix, or they say effacement. So if they're 70% effaced or if they're 100% effaced, what they're saying is that the cervix has thinned out to where it's as thin as it can be before labor begins. So that's the thickness. Effacement is the thickness of the cervix itself. Dilation is the opening of the cervix. Think like when your pupils dilate. So that's actually the opening or the separation of these two cervical walls. So look at, well, it's not two, it's all the way around. So go back to 556 and you can see where they started to open. So that hole at the bottom of the uterus, that's the cervix. So it started to open. And in part B, you can see the baby's head is pushing down on it and it's making it open even more. So that is the dilation part of that. And so the maximum dilation, they say, is 10 centimeters. And that's when they determine, okay, when your cervix gets to 10 centimeters open, that is the diameter of the opening of the cervix during labor, then you're ready to start pushing for the baby to be expelled. So that's typically dilation is the longest part of labor. That's until you get to that full 10 centimeters of the diameter opening. Expulsion. So this starts with full dilation and goes all the way to the delivery of the baby. So full dilation, usually, again, that's when the mom starts pushing to help move the baby out of the vaginal canal. And usually that's less than an hour, but it could be a little bit longer than that. And then the last one is the delivery of the placenta. Contractions will continue. So even after the baby comes out, contractions still keep going because the placenta has got to come out and the uterus has to clamp down so the mom won't continually bleed, because where that placenta came off of the uterine wall, there's all these broken blood vessels right there because that placenta was attached to the mom's blood vessels. And so bleeding actually occurs after pregnancy for like 6 weeks. There's like a pretty steady bleeding. The first week or two is the heaviest, and then it kind of thins out and lessens over time. But yeah, that bleeding still occurs because the uterus has to clamp back down, and that bleeding on the inside of the uterus, those blood vessels don't just heal up automatically. So that bleeding occurs for about 6 weeks after the child is born. But immediately the afterbirth has to come. So that's the placenta and the amniotic sac. And all right, lactation. So talking about milk production, breast milk. Production of breast milk occurs in mammary glands. Contains nutrients and antibodies. And that's important to know. Breast milk, they say breast is best. And the reason that they came up with that slogan is that one reason is that babies get the nutrients that they need, but the second reason is that babies get antibodies. Whatever antibodies the mom has, those are actually found in the breast milk so that the baby can be immune to whatever the mom is immune to as well while they're still nursing or while they're still breastfeeding. Now, not everybody can breastfeed. Not everybody wants to breastfeed, and formula is fine, and it provides the nutrients that babies need. But that's why breast milk is always recommended, because it has that extra bit of, it's got that extra bit of antibodies that helps to really boost their immune system. And they say that there's other things too. So one example is that mother's breast milk at night tends to have hormones in it that will help, not hormones, but tends to have, maybe hormone is the word, but in it so that the baby can sleep better. And there's all kinds of stuff. You can research it. It's really interesting. But again, not everybody can breastfeed, and breastfeeding's not for everyone. It's hard and it's time consuming. It's really difficult, but it's worth it in the end. So I would encourage you ladies to do that if you can, but if you can't, then that's just part of it, and that's okay, and there's nothing to feel guilty about. Sorry, ran over. Activation of milk-producing cells. So late in pregnancy, there's an increase in level of estrogen and progesterone, which makes the brain start producing prolactin releasing factor, which triggers prolactin, the hormone, which is released from the pituitary. That causes milk production. Delivery of the milk through the ducts then occurs as a result of oxytocin. So oxytocin is that same hormone that causes the uterine contractions, which means that especially in the beginning, when mothers breastfeed, right, that's babies sucking reflex on the nipple of the mom actually causes the mom's brain to produce oxytocin. Well, remember that oxytocin makes the uterus contract. So while breastfeeding, the uterus continues to contract, and that helps to clamp down the uterus again so that that extra bleeding doesn't occur. All right, and that is it, you guys. We are last one, finished it up. If you guys have any questions, hopefully Ms. Trout can help you. I don't know how available I am this week because I've got my calendar right. I don't really remember what day I had this lecture scheduled for, but I'm having the baby on the 21st, so I haven't had it yet, I guess, but soon. So anyways, if you guys have any questions, I'm still available this week by phone if Ms. Trout needs to call if you've got anything. Other than that, I will talk to you guys soon.